In 1250, the most dangerous place in England was not a battlefield, it was a tournament field. Medieval tournaments killed more knights than most actual wars of the period. Not occasionally, not exceptionally, but as a routine feature of the event that everyone who attended understood, and nobody considered sufficient reason to stop attending. The Church banned tournaments repeatedly across the 12th and 13th centuries. They banned them because people kept dying. The knights kept holding them anyway. This tells you something important about the medieval attitude toward recreational risk, and something equally important about the Church's actual authority over the people it was theoretically governing. The reversal of expectation that medieval tournaments demand is this: they were not sport. They were not entertainment in the way a modern sporting event is entertainment, a spectacle staged for the pleasure of a crowd that has no direct stake in the outcome. A medieval tournament was a business transaction conducted at high speed on horseback with blunt instruments. The objective was not to win a trophy or a ribbon. The objective was to capture your opponent, take possession of his horse and armor, and hold him for ransom. The knight who performed best at a tournament went home with the horses, the armor, and the cash payments of every knight he had unhorsed or captured during the day. The knight who performed worst went home on foot, having surrendered his equipment to whoever had beaten him, and spent the next several months raising the money to pay his ransom and replace his gear. The crowd watched because it was genuinely exciting. The participants competed because it was genuinely profitable. The two motivations were compatible but not identical, and the tournament existed to serve both simultaneously. William Marshal is the name that appears in every serious account of medieval tournaments, and with good reason. He is the most thoroughly documented tournament competitor of the medieval period, and the clearest illustration of what the tournament circuit actually was for the knights who competed in it professionally. Marshal was born around 1147, the fourth son of a minor English nobleman, which meant he had a knightly upbringing and essentially no inheritance. In the social arithmetic of 12th century England, the fourth son of a minor nobleman had two realistic career options: the church or the tournament circuit. Marshal chose the tournament circuit. Over the following decade, he competed in tournaments across France and England with a consistency and success that his biographer, the author of the Histoire de Guillaume le Maréchal, the only full biography of a non-royal medieval figure to survive from the period, documented in considerable detail. In a 10-month period that his biographer records with something approaching awe, Marshal and a single partner captured 503 knights. 503. Each capture meant a ransom negotiation. Each ransom negotiation meant money. Marshal did not inherit his way to wealth and influence. He captured it, horse by horse and knight by knight, on tournament fields across northern France. He never lost a tournament in 40 years of competition. He eventually became the regent of England. He started with nothing but a horse and the willingness to use it. Your morning on the day of the tournament begins before dawn with the arming process, the ritual of putting on plate and mail armor that required the assistance of a squire and took the better part of an hour to complete correctly. The armor you are wearing in 1250 is not the full plate armor of the 15th century that most people picture when they think of a medieval knight. It is a hauberk, a long coat of mail made from interlocking iron rings, worn over a padded undergarment called an acqueton, that absorbs some of the impact of blows that the mail itself deflects. Over the hauberk goes a surcoat, a fabric garment bearing your heraldic colours that identifies you on the field to opponents, allies, and the heralds whose job it is to keep track of who has captured whom. On your head goes a great helm, a cylindrical iron helmet that covers your entire face with small holes for vision and ventilation. The vision through a great helm is approximately what you would get looking through a letterbox. The ventilation is approximately what you would get in a sealed room. You will be wearing this for several hours. In the summer heat of an English tournament field, knights occasionally passed out from heat exhaustion inside their helmets without being struck by anything at all. This was considered an embarrassing way to lose. The tournament field in 1250 is not the neat enclosed lists of the later medieval period. The rectangular arena with spectator stands and a central barrier separating the jousting lanes that appears in every film about medieval knights. The tournament of 1250 is a melee, a mass combat involving two teams of knights fighting across a field that might extend for several miles of open countryside. The teams are typically organized by region or by the affiliation of their members with particular lords. The fighting begins at a signal and continues until sufficient knights have been captured or unhorsed that the result is no longer in doubt, which might take several hours. There are rules. The rules prohibit certain particularly lethal techniques and designate areas called refuges where a knight can withdraw temporarily without being attacked. The rules are enforced by heralds and by the general agreement of the participants that the tournament only functions as a profitable enterprise if everyone adheres to the conventions that make capture more valuable than killing. Dead knights cannot pay ransoms. This practical consideration moderated the violence more effectively than the Church's theological objections had. The weapons used in the 1250 tournament were not blunted in any meaningful sense. The distinction between tournament weapons and war weapons was less absolute than later popular history suggests, particularly in the earlier period of tournament history, when the melee was closer in character to an actual battle than to a stylized competition. Knights died at tournaments regularly enough that the chroniclers of the period recorded tournament deaths with the same matter-of-fact brevity they used for deaths in battle. Geoffrey of Brittany, son of Henry II of England, died in a tournament accident in 1186. He was 27 years old and one of the most powerful men in France. The tournament that killed him continued after his death. The practical dangers extended beyond the immediate combat. A knight unhorsed in a melee might be trampled by subsequent combatants who could not see him through their helmets. A knight whose helmet was damaged in a fall might suffocate before his squire could reach him to remove it. A knight who sustained a serious injury during the fighting might not receive adequate treatment in time. Medieval battlefield medicine was available at tournaments, but it was medieval battlefield medicine, which is a category of care that carried its own significant mortality risk. The financial structure of the tournament circuit created a stark division between knights who had the resources to compete successfully and knights who were trying to build those resources through competition. A knight needed at least one destrier, a tournament warhorse, to compete. A good destrier cost approximately the annual income of a small manor. A knight who lost his horse in a tournament had lost not just his transportation, but his primary competitive asset and a significant fraction of his total wealth. The ransom system compounded this. A captured knight owed his captor not just the horse and armor he was carrying, but a cash payment negotiated after the combat, and the negotiation happened at a time when the captured knight had no leverage whatsoever. Young knights entering the circuit for the first time frequently lost their horses, their armor, and accumulated significant debt in their first season before they had developed the skill to compete profitably. Some never recovered financially. Some recovered over years of increasingly skilled competition. William Marshal recovered so comprehensively that he ended his career as one of the wealthiest men in England. The tournament circuit was, in economic terms, a redistribution mechanism that moved wealth from less skilled knights to more skilled ones, with a ruthless efficiency that no other medieval institution matched. The Church's opposition to tournaments was sustained, theologically grounded, and almost completely ineffective. Pope Innocent II banned tournaments at the Second Lateran Council in 1139. Pope Innocent III banned them again. Pope Gregory IX banned them again. Pope Innocent IV banned them again. The pattern here is instructive. Each ban was issued because the previous ban had not worked. Each subsequent ban was issued with slightly more emphatic language, as if the problem with the previous ban had been insufficient emphasis rather than insufficient enforcement mechanism. The Church's primary sanction was the denial of Christian burial to knights killed in tournaments, a serious spiritual consequence in an era that took the afterlife with complete seriousness. The knights who continued to die at tournaments despite this sanction were presumably either confident in their ability to survive or had made their peace with the theological consequences. Most appear to have been confident in their ability to survive. Most of them were right. Some of them were not. The audience at a medieval tournament was not the passive crowd of a modern sporting event. The stands, temporary wooden structures erected around the edges of the tournament field, housed the nobility and their ladies, who were participants in the social ritual of the tournament as directly as the knights on the field. The awarding of a prize by a noble lady to the tournament's outstanding performer was a standard element of the occasion that connected the combat on the field to the courtly culture of the surrounding society. Merchants set up stalls around the perimeter, selling food, drink, equipment, and the various goods that a large temporary gathering of wealthy people created demand for. Heralds moved through the crowd, identifying participants by their heraldic devices and explaining the action to spectators who could not follow the melee directly. The tournament was, in the fullest sense, a fair. A temporary city assembled around a violent commercial transaction, generating economic activity for everyone in its vicinity and entertainment for everyone who could afford a position in the stands. The knights bleeding on the field below were the show. The show was well attended. The tournament of 1250 was in the process of a transformation that would, over the following century, change it from a mass melee into the individual joust that most people picture when they think of medieval tournaments. The joust, two knights charging at each other on horseback with lances, separated by a central barrier, was a safer, more controllable, and more easily spectated form of individual combat that lent itself to the kind of theatrical staging that tournament culture was increasingly interested in. The transition happened gradually and for multiple reasons. The growing power of national governments made large armed gatherings of knights politically concerning to kings who preferred their nobility not to have regular opportunities to practice organized violence in large groups. The increasing availability of plate armor made the melee considerably more survivable, but also considerably slower and less exciting to watch. And the tournament's function as a training exercise for actual warfare was declining as the nature of medieval warfare itself changed. The heavily armored knight on horseback was becoming less dominant on battlefields where English longbowmen had demonstrated at Crécy in 1346 that a man on an expensive horse was, from the right angle and distance, simply a large target. The melee tournament of 1250 was training for a style of warfare that was already beginning to become obsolete. Nobody had quite worked this out yet. The numbers associated with the medieval tournament circuit are numbers that the chroniclers of the period recorded with the enthusiasm of people who found the whole enterprise genuinely compelling, rather than the detachment of modern statistical analysis. William Marshal's 503 captures in 10 months remains the most frequently cited individual tournament statistic from the medieval period, and it requires some unpacking. The captures were made in the context of the melee format, where multiple opponents could be engaged simultaneously, and not all captures involved the same degree of individual combat. But the number is real, documented in a contemporary source, and gives some indication of the scale of activity that the tournament circuit represented in its most active periods. The ransom economy was substantial enough that tournament success could genuinely transform a knight's financial position over a career. Marshal arrived at the tournament circuit as a landless younger son with a horse, and left it as a man wealthy enough to attract the attention of the English crown as a political ally. The trajectory was unusual in its scale, but not in its direction. The tournament circuit was understood by everyone who participated in it as a mechanism for wealth accumulation, and the knights who competed in it were engaging in a calculated economic activity as much as a martial one. The romance of the tournament, the chivalric codes, the ladies' favour, the courtly ritual was real and was taken seriously. It was also draped over a straightforward business transaction that would have been recognizable to anyone who has ever attended a commercial auction. The merchandise was just considerably harder to transport than most auction goods, and considerably more likely to object to the proceedings. To survive your day as a knight at a medieval tournament in 1250, you would have needed a good horse, good armor, a skilled squire, sufficient tournament experience to read the melee correctly, the physical fitness to fight in full mail for several hours in whatever weather England chose to provide, and the financial resources to absorb a loss if the day went badly without losing your competitive position entirely. You would have needed to avoid the particular combination of circumstances, a fall, a trampling, a helmet that would not come off, that turned a tournament defeat into something the church would refuse to bury in consecrated ground. And you would have needed to be, by the demanding standards of the tournament field, considerably better than the majority of the people you were competing against. William Marshal met all of these requirements for 40 years and became regent of England. The knights he defeated over those 40 years met some of them. The knights who died on tournament fields across England and France in 1250 met fewer still. The church buried them anyway, eventually. The bans on Christian burial for tournament casualties were inconsistently enforced, because the bishops who were supposed to enforce them frequently had family members who competed in tournaments and found the policy awkward in practice. The tournament field is gone now. The meadows outside the English market towns where the melee was fought are farms and suburbs and retail parks. William Marshal is buried in the Temple Church in London, in effigy on the floor, in the armour he wore for 40 years of competition that nobody managed to remove from him by force. The effigy is still there. It looks, even in stone, like someone you would not want to meet on a tournament field.